I just bought the ultimate daily driver budget Trackhawk. So I previously owned a Challenger Hellcat, and that was kind of my dream car, modern day muscle, high horsepower, supercharged, and I loved it. The problem is, it's not an ideal Canadian daily because it sits more than half the year. So after owning it for a couple of years, I ended up selling it because I just felt like I wasn't getting the value out of it. But ever since then, I've been craving what that car gave and the thrill of having a high horsepower car. And so I think I found the perfect solution, and that is this 2009 SRT8 Jeep. But it's a little special. So these Jeeps come with a 6.1 liter Hemi. And now what's special about this one is this motor was sent off to Arrington in the US, and it got its 440 stroker kit. So this has been stroked out to a 7.2 liter Hemi. And on top of that, we've got a Magnuson supercharger. But here's the catch. The ad for this SRT had the 440 stroker kit listed, forged internals, Magnuson supercharger, Southern hot rod, transmission, Paramount transfer case. So it had this incredible list of parts. When I reached out to the seller, naturally, there's no paperwork for anything. So the previous seller had got it off of an auction and had zero history on it. So of course, some of those things could be vouched for. You can see the supercharger, and there were signs of some Arrington parts on this. However, a lot of it is just hearsay. So I did a little digging and ended up finding out that this was built at Davenport Motorsports in Calgary over a decade ago. So I gave him a call and ended up chatting with the owner. And wouldn't you know, he remembered this specific SRT8. He said there's thousands of cars that go through there, but he specifically remembered this one because he recalled sending the engine out to Arrington. So that was a huge step in reassuring what I was getting with this. Now, knowing that, I was pretty convinced that I wanted to buy this no matter what. However, when a vehicle like this, a high horsepower unit that had been racing and with no history on it for the past 10 years, you never know what you're getting. Had it been taken care of, or had it just been absolutely rallied between multiple owners? However, I was able to get this at such a promising price at $22,000. This year of the SRT8s were always selling around that 20,000 mark for a high kilometer units that were just stock. So at 22,000, with everything this did come with, I found it was a really good price. Even if I do need to do a little bit of work to get it back to 100%, I felt like I was well ahead of the game for my budget Trackhawk. So I went and looked at it. The thing fired up without hesitation, sounded amazing. And there's no immediate smoking guns. Ran really well. The body's in great shape. Interior's mint. So I was willing to accept any risk that would come with it. So it all sounds perfect. However, if you look behind me, you've got a lot of parts on that table. So I started driving it for about a week, commuting back and forth to work. And then one morning I get back after a night shift, pull it into the garage, and I can smell oil. It's starting to smoke. So I open the hood. I see oil inside of the bucket for my intake. And so I disassemble my intake, and it is full of oil. And then just suddenly my budget Trackhawk turned into a project. So let's rewind a little bit and I'll take you back to when this all started. Well guys, this turned into a project a little quicker than anticipated. Now, when I bought this, I knew it was going to be a risk. So I cannot say that I'm surprised. I went into this knowing that it was going to be a project, that there was going to be some work to be done. I was hoping to drive it for a little bit and enjoy it. But I got home from work yesterday and my intake was full of oil. Can still see some remnants inside of the intake box. The throttle body was full of oil. So I started doing just the minor preliminary checks, pulled off the ignition coils and checked some of the spark plugs. And this one in particular is full of oil. So I went ahead and pulled this entire side off, and not nearly as bad, but I do have some oil in some of these spark plug holes. I'm hoping it's just the seal around the spark plug tube and the valve cover, which isn't really a big deal, but I'm thinking there's a little more to it than that. I don't want to say it, but I think I'm getting a ton of blow-by, and we've got some issues internally in those cylinders and with those rings. And that's kind of the worst case scenario. So I'm hoping it's not that significant, but at this point, I think it's just worth my while to get these valve covers off. I've got a little bore scope coming. I'm going to check each cylinder to see if there's any smoking guns. If there are, then, well, we know it just gets a lot deeper than that. So fingers crossed, it's not that serious. I don't know what was put into this. I want to assume that all the valve train was done and replaced with aftermarket when they sent this engine out for the stroker kit, but I just don't know. So I really did want to pull these valve covers off to just inspect that valve train and check for lashing for the famous Hemi tick and whatnot. So it was a part of the plan, but again, I wanted to drive this a little more and get a feel for it before diving into it, but finding what I have found, I think it does make sense to just do this preliminary discovery work before I just keep romping on it and make it that much worse. So that being said, time to just start plucking away.
Sneaky plug off the bottom.
And this is not light, in case anyone was wondering. Never fails. There's always one plug that seems to want to catch you. Okay. Now I just don't want to slip on the fuel. Oh. Okay, aside from getting covered in fuel, that went pretty well. I didn't have to take the supercharger off, but I figured might as well. I'm jumping into this thing and I just want to learn more about it, and there's no better way to do that than just getting your hands on it, wrenching and pulling it apart. Then you know how to put it back together. So I figured I'll take the supercharger off. It honestly was not very difficult. A handful of bolts and it came off no problem. I shouldn't say no problem. The sucker is heavy, leaning over into the engine base. So definitely would have been a lot nicer having two sets of hands, but we got it done. And now look at how much more room we've got. Gonna take the vacuum and clean up a little bit around here and then stuff these holes. Then I'm gonna tackle the valve covers. But now I've got so much more room to tackle this. Should be a piece of cake. And just like that, valve covers are off and spark plugs are out. Not too bad. That really only took me about a couple hours to take the supercharger off, take the valve covers off. Now, what did I find? The valve train looks pretty solid. No smoking guns here, no broken springs, no visibly bent rods. However, there was so much oil in these spark plug tubes. You can see here, some of these were absolutely soaked in oil. And my original theory, or rather my original hope, was that it was the gasket between the valve cover and the head that seals the crankcase from the spark plug tube. Looking at those gaskets, they don't look that bad. There's no smoking guns there either. But I'm thinking just from what I saw yesterday, there might have just been enough pressure inside the valve cover to push up on those seals and get some oil in there. If that is the case, it's a little concerning because in order to build that much pressure, you need a lot of blow-by, which could be indicative of some bad rings or some cylinder damage, which that's the worst case scenario. I'm hoping not. I also seen that there was some oil sitting on top of the intake valves. I'm waiting for a camera to come tomorrow, and I'm gonna go ahead and scope each cylinder and just see what I see. I'm very happy with the progress I made so far. Everything's been going super smooth, especially since I've really never taken apart an engine to this extent. So this is very cool. I'm learning as I go, and I love that part of it. I just hope it doesn't end in disaster. One can only dream, and that's what I'm gonna do. We'll shut her down for tonight, pick it back up tomorrow. Okay guys, my camera has showed up. Very curious to see just how well this works. Cheap little camera that attaches to your phone I got off of Amazon. So we're gonna do a deep dive with this guy into each cylinder and see what we see. Once we're done with the camera, then the true test will be the compression test. Once again, cheap Amazon kit. And I'm going to predict that we're gonna see some low compression. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's hook up the camera, see what we're looking at. Well guys, it doesn't look that great. So there's some very apparent detonation damage in a few of these pistons. There's some huge cavities in the head and also out of some of these pistons. Those are just some of the risks when you have a performance built vehicle like this and you don't know who had it before you, and were they taking care of it? Were they running the proper fuel? You know, this detonation that I see in some of these cylinders is telling me no. There also does seem to be some scoring on the cylinder wall. Now it doesn't look to be that severe. I think the block is still salvageable, maybe just needs a hone. But essentially what I've seen justifies getting this engine out and just going through it all and getting it back to 100%. So now the project truly has begun. And once again, I went into this with the understanding and the acceptance of that. However, when I did buy this, they were asking $28,000. So I got them down $6,000. And I was willing to pay that $28,000 had this been perfect. So now I essentially have $6,000 of float that I was ready to pay anyways, that now can essentially go into getting this motor back to 100%. Now, is that gonna be enough? There might be some discovery work once we do open it up, and that might drag on a little bit, but I'm pretty confident that if I pull this engine myself, maybe even get some secondhand parts, I can get this back to 100% for very close to that $6,000 and still be at the 28 that I was originally gonna be at. And if I can get this running great at, I gotta say, close to 700 wheel horse for $28,000, I would definitely consider that a budget Trackhawk. So I've kind of been craving a project to work on, and it looks like I found myself my project. So I've decided that I am going to pull this engine, which I've never done before. So this is going to be a big learning experience for me, but I'm excited for the challenge. It will be really cool at the end of the day that I can say I pulled this, I rebuilt it, got it back together, and it will truly make it mine. So stay tuned, hit that subscribe button. You can learn along with me and join along for the journey of getting this back to the ultimate daily budget Trackhawk. We'll see you at the next one.